Welcome to Unite Now, where we bring unity to you, wherever you are.
Okay, let's do this. This is called Building Businesses in VR. My name is Chris Pruitt. I am the director of a content ecosystem at Oculus. That's a fancy way to say that it's my job to work with third-party developers and ensure that they are financially successful on our platform and can build businesses, and also that they produce content that our end users want and engage with. This is going to be a talk about ecosystems, about how we've designed the Oculus Quest ecosystem, and what we think has made the ecosystem successful, as well as themes for applications we think will be successful in the future of our Quest ecosystem. And when I say ecosystems, I have to define what that means. It's kind of a hand-wavy word. A lot of folks, I think, use this term to mean a lot of different things. But what I'm talking about very specifically is a value exchange. It's the value exchange where the customer purchases applications that the developer has built. And therefore, the customer is getting some value from the developer because they have, a great experience with the video game or whatever it is that they've purchased. And the developer gets paid and can build a business on top of the platform that enables this value exchange. So when I'm talking about an ecosystem, I'm talking about this virtuous cycle. And the thing that fuels it is money. Money that the developer earns in order to invest in future content, and money that the customer spends on the best content that is the thing that they're looking for in a virtual application store. The ecosystem design for Quest is pretty different than it is for Oculus's previous products. You might have heard that, for example, we started curating our software catalog with Quest. And I'm going to talk today about the thinking behind our strategy and how our strategy is actually implemented. But before I get there, I would just like to talk about some of the outcomes. So far, Quest has been out for just about a year, a little bit more than a year. But in the first 12 months since Quest launched, we were able to achieve $100 million of software sales on the Quest store. And it was not all, bundled up in one or two big winners. We actually have 20 developers that have made over $1 million each, and 10 developers that are over $2 million. This makes Quest the most profitable platform developers we've ever produced. And our trajectory for future growth is actually really strong. I think that we changed the way that we thought about ecosystems with Quest. And as a result, we have achieved a very strong initial result. I have to back up a little bit to talk about this topic and tell you just a little bit about my background, because I think that my experience, both as a developer and as somebody who works on platforms, has had a large influence in how we think about ecosystems at Oculus. I've sort of gone back and forth between being a developer and developing software, mostly video games, or working on platforms that distribute software, mostly video games. I worked on console games in the early 2000s. I worked on the Android team, particularly on Google Play as a developer-facing person in the early days of Android. And then I left Google and founded an indie game studio and shipped a bunch of video games to a bunch of different platforms. And these days, I'm at Oculus. I'm back on the platform side, and I'm thinking about how we can make a platform that'll make companies that looked like my indie game studio successful in VR. I learned a ton over the course of my career. In particular, I think the several years that I was running a video game startup were sort of the most educational part of my career so far. I mean, I shipped a bunch of titles in a bunch of different genres on a bunch of different platforms and learned that a lot of the things that I had thought were true in my previous life as, for example, a Google employee, a lot of those things turned out not to be true. In fact, I would say probably 50% of the things I thought were true going in were not actually true, particularly with respect to how ecosystems grow and how ecosystems work. In particular, I think the main thing that I came to understand while being a indie game developer is that growing ecosystems don't optimize for user value. most ecosystems out there aren't about connecting the customer with the best software. They're actually about optimizing for developer revenue. And that makes sense, right? Like if there's a platform with scale that has a potential for revenue, developers are going to do whatever they can to try to make sure that they generate money. That's a very reasonable thing for them to do. But on a lot of platforms, there's a pretty big disconnect between what you need to do in order to generate revenue and what would actually be best for the user. In particular, I found that platforms that have poor organic discovery systems, which means platforms where you can't really just browse the store and find something that's high quality, those platforms turn into advertising arms races. And that's because if you can't rely on the store to connect your application to your end user, then you have no choice but to go out and find that user yourself through user acquisition or marketing, which is a fine thing to do if you can afford it. But a lot of developers cannot afford to compete with big multinational corporations on marketing. And it should not be the case, I think, that only the rich companies can be successful on a platform. If the only way to be successful on a platform is to do your own marketing and go find your own customer base, and the store itself does very, very little for you to connect your application to an end user, then I think the end result is we actually get very little diversity of content, and we end up with content that is perhaps high quality, but only targets a narrow audience. We saw a little bit of this even in the early days of our Oculus platforms. I think on Oculus Rift and Oculus Go, there are many developers who launched their application and then, became part of a very large catalog and found that it was difficult for users to find their apps in that catalog. There's a lot of high quality stuff on Rift and on Go, and I'm very happy that we have a number of titles on those platforms that have been quite financially successful as well. But it's also true that if you have a platform that is, a deep catalog with a lot of variable quality, the customer is not going to spend their time sifting through applications to try to find the good things. You can sell a customer a bad app once or twice, and then they'll probably leave the platform and never come back. And this learning from Oculus Rift and Oculus Go was something that we sort of understood ahead of time, but once we actually saw the data, it became really super clear that the key to retaining a customer is to make sure that the experience they have with applications is really high quality. And that means they need to be able to find the software that they're looking for, whether or not it is the sort of top 10 or sort of most advertised application. So these days, we think about our ecosystem in terms of the sort of holistic shape of the platform. Every ecosystem is going to have hits. They're going to have something that does, 10x better or 100x better than everything else. And every platform is going to have misses. Even if the software is well made, the production quality is really good, the quality is good, there's always going to be software on any platform that fails to excite an audience or fails to find its target audience or has some sort of fatal flaw. Hits and misses, the existence of those things are, I think, normal in any ecosystem. Where we want to concentrate our focus to understand the health of our own ecosystem on Oculus Quest is really the middle. The folks that are in the middle, their business plan is not, buying a lottery ticket. Their business plan is not to be the most successful application on the platform. And the question is, if you land in the middle, if you're in the 50th or the 40th or the 30th percentile of the platform, what kind of profit are you making? Are you still able to build a business? Are you still able to have enough revenue to generate, a second or third or fourth title? If we can maximize the size of this middle area, we can ensure that all sorts of different titles will be produced because it will mean that developers can sort of take risk on things that are not proven necessarily to be hits or new ideas that we've never seen anything before, or perhaps just really high quality software that doesn't have the advertising muscle to compete with the things at the very top of the platform. So what we did with Quest is we instituted a minimum quality bar. If the customer comes into our store and decides to take a chance on some app they've never heard of before, they should have confidence that it'll be well made and worth the price. And, a way to think about what quality actually is to think about depth, length, polish, and value. These are the sort of traits that every successful application we've seen on our platform, whether it's sort of number one or whether it's sort of further down in that middle part of the stack, has. Is there enough content here? Is it lengthy? Does the content that you have, is there depth in the mechanics? Is there interesting nuance in what it is that you're doing? Is it polished? Does it look good? Is it, the presentation really high quality? Our customers want to understand that the software that they buy is going to be money well spent. That when they purchase a game on our platform, there's going to be some depth of experience that equates to the value that they perceive from any other video game platform. And then it will have sort of a fullness of experience, meaning, that each individual mechanic will be well implemented. And there will be sort of a depth of mechanics and a depth of story and a depth of, graphics quality. Like the overall presentation will be something meaty that you can play and sort of chew on and not just sort of run through very quickly. Of course, none of this is specific to VR. This is how we think our customers define value. Is this title worth the money that's being charged for it? And by what metrics is it worth it? And we think depth, length, and polish are really what our customers are thinking about when they try to assess software that they don't have any external signal about. Something that hasn't been advertised to them, something that doesn't come with an IP that they're already aware of, something that's new that they're willing to take a chance on. Of course, this doesn't mean that you should not advertise. Any developer who can afford advertising, whether it's buying a billboard or doing a massive user acquisition campaign or just having a Twitter account for your game, you absolutely should. Any amount of advertising you can afford is worth it. But our goal is to make software, even software that's pretty niche, that maybe wasn't able to reach the target audience off platform, to be able to find that audience on the platform. And for that to be true, quality has been the number one thing we need to maximize. This is really important to me because the future of VR is not going to be about one type of application. It's not going to be about one type of genre or even one type of monetization scheme or one type of target audience. Diversity in content is what's going to lead to diversity in our player base. And that's really important to me. Quest is clearly a games device, but VR long-term is going to be more than video games. And for folks to be able to take risk in genres that are not proven or with ideas that are new to VR that are not proven, that means they need an ecosystem that can actually support their business, even if their target is experimental or is a niche. In order to produce a diverse audience, we believe we need a diverse content slate. And that means by definition that niche content needs to be discoverable and trustworthy. So what we do on Quest is we have a curation system, and the way it works is we ask you to submit a concept document about the title that you want to build. We ask for a document and not your actual game or your application because we want to give you an answer about whether or not we'll ship this title on our store before you've made a huge investment of time and money in building the application. Ideally, you submit this concept document to us before you've even written a line of code. We have a diverse group of folks that make up the concept review committee. And they go through every single concept document that is submitted to us and they make a call on it. And what they need to be convinced of is that you're building something that is going to have value to the user that meets sort of our minimum bar. We don't, for example, we don't set any price floors or anything like that on our platform, but a good rule of thumb is to consider $10 worth of value, which is defined by what the greater entertainment software precedent defines $10 of value to be worth, as a good baseline. If you think that, or if we think that your software is not worth at least $10, it's probably not a fit for the store. This is what our a concept approval document looks like. This is the sample doc that we ship with our the approval process webpage. But basically, it's 3 slides asking us. We ask you to tell us about your game, explain to us the mechanics, talk to us about the art style, talk to us about your team, talked about your sort of shipping plan and what you're going to charge for it, and why this particular game is going to resonate with our audience. Basically, give us the product pitch. Like, tell us why this is going to be something that's really successful and why you're the right developer to build it. And that's what we're looking for. Just 3 pages. If we accept your concept, we will be added to the Oculus Developer Program, which means you get a bunch of resources from us. In particular, you get an account manager, which is a business support person you can call up at any time, talk to about your application. You get engineering team support. We have a whole engineering team that can help with everything from performance analysis to working with you on your game design. Any kind of production support that you need, this team can support. We also do full professional QA, 7 weeks of QA for every title that ships on Quest. We can help you with localization as well. These are services that we provide for free to you as long as you're part of the developer program. And of course, we will help you with the planning and promotion of your launch. Our goal is for those developers who are in our developer program to be set up for success when they launch, to have the highest possible chance of having a hit or having a financially successful result that as possible. We don't accept every concept, though. And if we reject your concept, we encourage you, please, not to take it personally. We actually get a lot of concepts that are submitted to us that are sort of immediately rejected on technical grounds. And what that usually means is that the folks that are submitting it didn't look at the instructions very carefully. In particular, we get a lot of submissions of enterprise applications. Enterprise apps are great, but they don't belong in our consumer store. If you're interested in building an enterprise application, you should check out the Oculus for Business ISV program, which is at business.oculus.com, which is the portal for developers who are building software specifically for enterprise apps. We also get a fair number of submissions that just aren't in the format that we asked for. We asked for a 3-page presentation on your app, not a 30-page Word document describing your game design. And if you submitted something that's in the wrong format, we'll just bounce it back to you. But the majority of rejections really are about meeting the quality bar. And when we reject something on quality grounds, we don't generally give feedback. We often don't have enough information to give real actionable feedback about what you need to change. And in order to sort of go deep and provide that sort of feedback would require a lot more bandwidth than we can afford with the total number of concept rejections that we get. What we will do is we'll often recommend that a developer check out Oculus Start. Oculus Start's an incubation program designed to help developers that are very promising but not quite at the quality bar that we demand to get access to more resources, get access to support, get access to hardware. So if you get a rejection from us, please consider Oculus Start. I also want to just briefly mention that we announced earlier this year that we're building a new way to distribute applications on Oculus Quest. This will not be in the store. This will not go through a sort of concept review. It will be a way that a developer can send an application to his own community, his own user base directly without having to be in the store and without relying on sideloading. I don't have anything really new to talk about with this yet, other than to mention that we've announced it, it's in development, and will be available sometime next year. Okay, let's move on to the second part of this talk, which is patterns for success and themes for the future. Basically, where we think our ecosystem is going. The most successful titles today fall into a number of genres. They're all video games or some form of video games, and a lot of them have some common traits. In particular, we see the rhythm, shooter, and fighting boxing genres as relying a lot on full body motion. It turns out that once you can track your hands and your head very accurately, there's all kinds of game design that's opened up about actually moving your body. And in particular, Quest is a wireless system. There's no tether to some computer or anything else that's on you. And so you can move around in whatever space you have available in your room. And that has enabled sort of new types of gameplay that we've never really seen before that has been very successful with customers. I also would call out the sort of adventure and horror genres as being an area where developers have really focused on the convincingness of their environment, creating a virtual fantasy environment that you can teleport the player to and make them believe that they're there has been really a strong hook for a lot of our customers, and something that I think that is uniquely leverages the superpower of VR. We also have some genres that I would call underrepresented, and by that I mean that either we don't have enough titles in these genres yet, or the titles that we have don't satiate the demand that we see from users. These are all titles that we think will do very well with the customer base we have today, and we'd like to see more of. In particular, you'll notice that some of these are not video games. And we think that fitness, productivity, and leisure learning in the long term are going to be critical non-game genres that do well with customers that bought our headset to play video games. Like even folks who, went out and bought a Quest because they want to play Beat Saber or something. Those types of customers also tend to like things like fitness, productivity, and leisure learning in the future. This is an area where we see quite a large opportunity for growth. Let's go back to the Quest audience and talk about a little bit about more who they are. We did a pretty long, multi-year study of potential VR customers. We talked to thousands of people in a bunch of different countries and sort of came up with a segmentation of people who are likely to buy VR in the near future. And then we asked them, what do they like? What do they want to do? Who are they? What do they want to spend money on? What are their interests in? And that helped us, hone in the design for Quest as a games device. I can tell you a little bit about some of the findings. First of all, everybody who wants to, buy a VR headset today tends to be some sort of video game player. But even within the group of people that we would consider gamers, there's a bunch of different sort of sub-communities, and they behave differently. For example, we have a core gamer audience. I think anybody who's worked in video games has a pretty good idea of who the core gamer is. This is a mostly male, high early adopter audience. They spend a lot of money on video games. They're very dialed in. They already know a lot about VR because they spent a long time in online communities. We have a lot of these folks in our early Quest customer segments. There's also what I would call a more regular gamer. This is a group that also spends a lot of money and a lot of time on video games, but they don't necessarily consider themselves to be a hardcore gamer. These folks tend to like competitive multiplayer games, and while they're majority male, there are more women in this group than there are in the core gamer group. We have a lot of these folks in our Quest audience today as well. Story Seeker is a super interesting group. This is a group of folks that are looking for primarily narrative and story quality, and I'll come back to them in a minute. But I wanted to touch also on the mobile gamer. This is an audience of people who play a lot of video games, but they play them mostly on their phone, and they don't have a ton of interest in VR. And they also don't spend a lot of money on entertainment software generally. Although these are a very relevant part of the sort of greater gamer segmentation, they're not a segment that we are targeting right now with VR. And in fact, I don't think we'll see very many of them in the near future on Oculus Quest. So just to spend a moment on the Story Seeker, though, to come back to this person. Story Seeker is a group of people who play video games primarily because of their narrative or of the story that the playing the game allows them to consume. These folks like large open worlds. They like deep character interaction. I think everything from walking simulators to Skyrim is popular with this set of folks because what they're there for really is narrative value. Super interesting about these folks is, in addition to being the most gender balanced group that we have found, they also are the largest group. There are more folks in this category than there are in any of the other categories that we've talked about. And in fact, they're almost exactly 50-50 split between male and female. In fact, there's slightly more women in this group than there are men. What's interesting about Story Seekers is they're not early adopters. They're not the folks that show up in the first year of a new platform. These are folks that show up a little bit later in the cycle. And what they need before they arrive is sort of to be convinced that the platform that they're looking at can actually host the types of games they're looking at. So I think we don't actually have a ton of these folks today, but we will have a bunch of them in the future, and they're a really interesting segment. Speaking of the future, let's talk about what's on the horizon for the future of VR and our platform. Think that social, and when I say social, I mean synchronous social experiences, where you are an avatar with articulated hands and head, and you're talking to other people who are alive in the same space with VoIP and spatialization and all that jazz. That set of experiences are going to be extremely common and extremely popular in the future of VR. We've already seen quite a lot of engagement in titles like VR Chat, Rec Room, and Echo Arena, which just launched in beta this year. And we think that being in a shared virtual space is one of the sort of bedrock elements that will make VR long-term successful. This doesn't mean that every application is going to be a multiplayer game, or that some sort of social features are going to be required from every app. We do think it'll be a really common thing to do with a VR headset in the next couple of years. In particular, since we've been on this coronavirus lockdown, we've seen applications that can afford social connectivity, really skyrocket in terms of their total usage. We also think hand tracking is going to be an important part of the future of VR. When I say hand tracking, what I mean is you putting your controllers down and putting your hands up in front of your face and seeing your actual hands tracked via computer vision in the virtual environment. We have this technology shipped as a beta late last year, and it has just come out of beta a couple of months ago. So it's still very early technology, but what we have today is pretty impressive, and we already have some developers who are experimenting with ways to use a hand tracking as a core input for their experiences. In fact, if you turn on hand tracking in your Quest today, you can put your controllers down and try it for yourself. Don't think that controllers are necessarily going anywhere. There's a lot of software that is going to continue to require, highly accurate, controller-based tracking with buttons and triggers and all of the other haptic affordances that come with having an implement in your hands. We do think that there's probably new classes of applications or new genres that we haven't even seen yet that will be particularly advantageous to use tracked hands for, mostly because they will significantly reduce the friction of getting into VR. Like I said, this is an early technology. It's something that we've just started to ship. There's a full Unity integration for hand tracking that's part of our Unity Asset Store integration, if you want to play with it. But it is an area that we think we'll see a significant amount of growth in the next couple of years. But whatever it is that you're building, I just want to come back to these core tenets that we see as successful in almost every application on our platform, and that's depth, length, and polish. And this is how the customer computes their estimation of value. And those things that are higher value are more financially successful. And this is the strongest correlation that we've found. I would encourage you to make something meaty, make something that's beautiful, make something that is engaging and can provide at least a few hours of entertainment. This is the elements that our customer base are looking for, and this is what we're looking for as part of our curation program. So to finish up, I'm going to spend a minute just to plug our developer resources. Developer.oculus.com is your landing page for everything you need to develop for our platform. Also, I mentioned Oculus Start in this talk. If you're interested in Start, I encourage you to check out the website below and sign up or apply. You can follow me on Twitter if you're interested. I have to warn you that I mostly only tweet about old horror games. Thank you very much for your time. Please check out the Unite Now page for other useful sessions. And thank you.